Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Welcome to the Friday edition here on Bloomberg Radio on the satellite radio channel 121. We see you on YouTube. Do you see us? Search Bloomberg Business News Live. Having survived the votorama. We'll talk about this. Yeah, senators were working at 4:45 in the morning. Were you? Not that often to make up for it after spending so many hours outside of the nation's capital. We actually got a vote. Something actually happened in Washington, actual news. As we stand by to hear from Donald Trump, he's talking right now in the White House. When they play it back, we'll have it for you, addressing the governor's working session, generating a boatload of headlines, as you just heard from Charlie Pellet. 25% auto tariffs, unlocking energy for AI. We'll get there. He's got lunch today with J.D. Vance. I'm going to swear in Howard Lutnick as the Secretary of Commerce a little bit later on, and then we'll do the EO dance. I heard Carol Massar talking earlier. She says Bloomberg Businessweek is now the EO show. I see you too, Carol. But, of course, we'll bring this to you as it all happens. CPAC taking place just a little bit down the Potomac River. Byron Donalds and Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, the headliners. Kristi Noem's going to be there as well. The featured official at tonight's Ronald Reagan dinner. So the votorama, imagine 4:45 a.m. What do we have? Everybody but Rand Paul on board, at least for Republicans. 52-48, $340 billion budget. There's your framework. They got it done. What Lindsey Graham was talking about as a plan B yesterday, yeah, it happened. But before you get real excited, I want you to take a look at what Terry Haines is saying about this whole thing. This week's good news, bad news. On the tax cuts bill, on net markets, positive. But here's the problem. Terry says you're going to have to wait a long time. Remembering, of course, the government's going to run out of money in the middle of March. Terry Haines says markets will not see a final tax cut bill action until the second half of the calendar year, probably not the fourth quarter. Same basic timetable as 2017. So what does that mean? Markets think things as negative like tariffs will front run by months the positive parts of the Trump economic agenda. So what's Wall Street going to look like by then? Terry Haines joins us right now, the founder of Pangea Policy on Bloomberg TV and radio. Every now and then I get a crack at Terry. It's great to have you back, sir. Happy Friday. That doesn't sound good to me when you market's negative. If we're waiting around to the fourth quarter to get this tax and spend bill done, what will Wall Street do in the meantime?
They will, to use one of the great press words now, they'll fret. They'll fret a lot, and meanwhile other things will happen, and they might be good or they might be bad. Earnings might be good, geopolitical risk might be bad, whatever. It's another testament to the difference between political time and markets time. Some of your colleagues have been opining and speculating, and seriously, I mean, they're reflecting markets by saying so. Is wondering where the tax bill is, and the president was inaugurated 1 month and 1 day ago, and Congress has been around for 2 weeks, longer than that. This takes a while, as you well know, and the audience well knows, because there's lots of hoops to jump through, and including figuring out what the budget is, figuring out what the deficit is, and that's really the starting gun. Once they do that, then they get into the specifics on the tax bill, and that takes probably the second half of the year, just like 2017.
Yep. How about that? History is our guide here, at least to some extent. This is a different political environment that we're in now. There's a much thinner majority for Republicans in the House. It could be one member at that point. I guess we'll have to wait and see how that goes when Elise Stefanik heads to the UN. But big picture, Terry, where's your head around this whole thing? We've got the House set to vote on something next week, and it seeks to cut Medicaid spending to help pay for the tax cuts. And we're already hearing a lot of outcry about this. Republican members have been home for the week. They're holding town halls. They're hearing concerns about DOGE in some cases going over the line. Medicaid, what are you going to do with my entitlements here? And it's going to make this a knockdown, drag out. I guess that's why you see it lasting all year. But Who's going to win this fight between the Senate and the House?
Don't know yet, frankly. I thought Senator Graham was quite right to say everybody needs a plan B. And, but plan B may well turn into plan A. There's no guarantee that, given the margins that you just ran down, that the House will end up having the votes for much of anything. I mean, we're not even to the point. This is how preliminary it is. We're not even to the point where the committees of jurisdiction, Energy and Commerce and Ways and Means, even get to start talking about exactly what sort of health efficiencies or cuts or anything else they might make, but they've got to make a lot of them. They're tasked to make a lot of them. So that is going to be a knockdown drag out through the spring. And then on top of that, I think what shakes markets further in Washington confidence over the next few weeks is you're going to have a State of the Union address that'll be, a barn burner triumphalist. Going forward, you'll have a likely, I think, government shutdown. You've got debt ceiling looming out there in the late spring, early summer. There's not going to be a lot of confidence in the next few weeks in markets that Washington or Trump specifically have got the goods to actually execute. Now, I think they do on the tax cut, ultimately, but they're going to have to go through a trough first.
Boy, you just said a lot. By the way, this is exactly what Sarah Chamberlain mentioned last evening on Balance of Power, Republican Main Street partnership. Yeah, shutdown looking like it may actually happen this time. But we've got a House resolution, Terry, that we're told is going to be on the floor next week. It includes instructions for the House Energy and Commerce Committee to find $880 billion in cuts. That's why we're talking about Medicaid and potentially some of the other entitlements. Can that pass? That actually goes to the floor next week?
Well, the budget resolution is on a knife edge right now. I think the budget resolution passes. What you just talked about in terms of Medicaid and all those kinds of other sorts of things is implied in the amount of savings that they're asked to do. But nobody's telling them they have to find that amount. Nobody's telling Energy and Commerce they have to find that amount of savings in Medicaid. Somebody can vote on this thing, feel covered. But when Energy and Commerce comes back in a few weeks and says, here's how we're going to do this, that's really where the rubber meets the road. And, frankly, where I think some revolt happens. The phrase that keeps going around in my head is from Aaron Sorkin's A Few Good Men, where the colonel keeps getting asked by the prosecutor, by the defense, you said Santiago was not to be touched, and yet you said Medicaid was not to be touched, and yet here we are. It's going to get worse for the majority before it gets better, I think.
Terry Haines, did you order the code red? I want you to walk me into the House chamber the night Donald Trump addresses a joint session of Congress. We'll call it State of the Union for the fun of it. It's basically the same deal.
Right.
Decorum? Is this going to be a call and response like Joe Biden had going with the Republican Congress? What's Donald Trump walking into that night? It's going to be another circus, isn't it?
Oh, I thought Patrick McHenry on your program yesterday had it exactly right. It's going to be an awful lot like the UK Parliament's PMQs, and I won't belabor it, but McHenry is a keen observer. He's spot on about that. Yes, there's going to be a lot of yelling and screaming one way or the other, and there's going to be a lot of people screaming "You lie!" Except it's going to be the other party this time.
Boy, where's Congressman Wilson now? All right. Well, Terry, the president's going to be speaking in a moment here. He's talking about 25% auto tariffs in our remaining 30 seconds. Do those ever see implementation?
I think eventually some of them do. I don't think 30% necessarily, but there will be a need to keep the pressure on. And, we should always remember tariffs to this administration are a tool in service of a broader economic policy reset.
He's not only a friend of the program, but a friend of the entire network. There's only one Terry Haines, the founder of Pangea Policy. Terry, it's good to see you.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Headlines are flying out of the White House right now as Donald Trump speaks to Republican governors who are in town. Republican Governors Association winter meetings underway. He was the headliner speaking to the group last evening. But this has been a romp. They've been going for almost an hour here, right? My God, it has been an hour, actually, since he walked into the state dining room, commenting on a number of issues, including auto tariffs. If you're looking at the terminal, he says, 25% tariffs on foreign cars to start April 2nd, probably. Talked about power plants and AI, wants to see power plants built alongside data centers, AI production facilities, attacked wind energy, and started reading off some Doge projects. He's showing up with the receipts pretty much every time he's at a podium here. I can run through them all for you, but you've heard them on this program. Coming off a big night at CPAC. Now, President Trump's going to be the headliner there tomorrow, the Conservative Political Action Conference. It's happening down the Potomac River a short ways from the nation's capital. A big Ferris wheel when you drive down. It looks like an amusement park, and it is a bit of a circus at CPAC. That's the point. Big rah-rah. Elon Musk shows up last night literally with a chainsaw and started swinging it around. He's yelling. He was wearing Terminator sunglasses and a lot of questions about the mood he was in. Having a little trouble communicating and answering questions last evening. In this case, he did all right. He was asked about the Doge dividend, sending checks to every American based on how much money they save. Here's how it went.
It's money that's taken away from things that are destructive to the country and from organizations that hate you to you. That's awesome.
Does it seem, have you talked to
that's like
president?
glorious. That's like
the best.
The spoils of battle, you know?
Spoils of battle. I like that. Is there traction on that?
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I talked to the president, and he's supportive of that, and so it sounds like that's something we're going to do.
Just a sample of the conversation on stage as we bring in Max Chafkin, Bloomberg Businessweek columnist, contributor to the Elon Inc. podcast. If you're not already subscribed, you should check it out if you care about this story, and I know you do if you're here on Bloomberg. Max, it's great to have you. If you only knew how often I ask if you can come on the program, because it's every day there's a story that I'd like to hear you weigh in on. So let's go a little bit big picture to start. As you just saw Elon Musk with the sunglasses, he's got the tech support T-shirt on half the time, is swinging around a chainsaw and so forth.
Unconventional look.
Yes. But so is he having a blast? Is this a hobby? Is this his new full-time occupation? Where does Elon Musk, the person, here, if you're with us on YouTube, you see President Milei giving him this chainsaw. Is this just a big party for him, Max?
He is certainly treating it that way, and I think for better for worse, on the CPAC stage, just judging from the audience response, as weird and awkward as some of these moments were, it seemed like it played pretty well in the room. And he is a rock star in kind of activist conservative circles. He's probably the most important surrogate for Donald Trump besides Donald Trump. I think there is a serious component here, both in terms of what Musk is actually doing. People are being affected in huge ways right now by these Doge cuts, and civil servants are in a state of, I think, from their point of view, crisis. And also, of course, there's potential for Musk to benefit from this stuff. Just recently seeing reports that the Justice Department lawsuit against SpaceX looks like it might be dropped. This is involving employing alleged discrimination. There are lots of ways that he can use this shtick to drive profits. And that's kind of what makes it so interesting, is that on one hand, it seems totally unserious. He's on stage, he's got the chain. He can't hear what he's saying, partly because he seems to have trouble finding his words at times, but also because the chain is rattling against the microphone. And yet he's doing all kinds of stuff. So again, it's both serious and unserious at the same time, I'd say.
Well, so you said a couple of things there referring to his, I guess, erratic behavior, we'll call it. He was having trouble stringing words together in a couple of moments last evening. That might just have been the mood he was in. Look, he's not a public speaker by trade. He's not Donald Trump, but there have been questions about his sobriety, about his mental state. Can you weigh in on that?
Yeah, I obviously have no idea what was going on in between his ears during that appearance, I'll say, look, Elon Musk, as you said, is an unconventional guy. He's somebody who has publicly talked about his drug use. He famously smoked, took a hit of a joint on the Joe Rogan podcast years ago, and has talked about ketamine use for depression. He also talks about his own kind of mental health challenges all the time. And I believe even during this appearance, it came up briefly, talking about his mind being a storm. And so look, he's unconventional, and he's in some ways transparent, at least compared to like a typical political figure. And that's part of the appeal, I think.
So he's got actual other jobs. He runs some pretty important companies, including a massive government contractor. And of course, Tesla. We can get into Twitter and all the rest here, but his actions in Washington are impacting some consumer behavior. And I wonder if you see this becoming a detriment, for instance, to people who think it's a political statement to drive a Tesla.
Well, yeah, we're seeing that already. And I mean, it's hard to know exactly how much politics is hurting Tesla's sales. Tesla was growing very quickly for a long time. Growth has slowed dramatically. The EV industry has also had, bumps in the road and so on. But it really does seem like in the US and Europe, where a lot of Tesla sales come from, the sales are slowing down. And that slowdown has coincided with Musk's political profile raising. I also think there are potential political costs. We're starting to see just the beginnings of blowback on the right to some of this stuff. Now, you're not going to see this at CPAC. You're talking about, dyed-in-the-wool activists, people who really like Elon Musk. Yeah, but, right. Reports in the front page story in the Washington Post about cabinet officials kind of privately grumbling. Politico did a story about some Congress people sort of worrying. Each of these cuts has impact and will have political costs. Bloomberg has a story today about how one of Musk's Doge employees who resigned after these eugenics reports that he had expressed support for eugenics, he's back and he's inside the Social Security Administration, right? Social Security affects a lot of people. There's a good chance this is not going to be super popular when we get to the midterm.
Yeah. Wow. All right. Tell me about his day-to-day to the extent that we know. Is he sleeping on the floor like he was at Twitter? Does he have some kind of a penthouse pad he's living in Washington? Does he fly back and forth to Texas? I don't understand how he does all of this stuff. How's he spinning all these plates at once?
Well, I mean, he's done this kind of thing for years where he will focus in on one thing. So when Tesla was preparing to release the Model 3, that was its affordable sedan back in 2018, he claimed to be sleeping at the factory. When he took over X, he claimed to be sleeping at the X office, right? And he seems to sort of push everything aside. And right now, as you say, it's Doge. He has said that he is sleeping at the Eisenhower Executive Office building. I think Musk has a tendency to kind of play this stuff up. Like, it would not surprise me if he also had a hotel room or whatever. Right. But he really is. I mean, he is spending a lot of time on this. And of course, spending a ton of time just staying on Twitter and posting. I mean, you look at the schedule, it boggles the normal mind. I mean, it's he's posting essentially nearly 24/7. So you got to ask yourself, like, when is this guy sleeping? And how is this going to affect his other companies?
This is exactly the conversation I wanted to have. And by the way, sleep deprivation may have a lot to do with his erratic behavior, right? This is something that we need to allow. Max, I know I'm asking you a lot of the same questions you're asking people in Elon Musk's orbit, but what's the end game here? I mean, does he just finally get bored, or how does he wrap this thing up? When the first year is done with Doge, he just moves back to Texas?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, right now, he seems pretty committed. And there had been thoughts that this could be just a passing fixation or something like that, or perhaps Trump would get tired of him. That doesn't seem like it's happening anytime soon. As you brought up, Trump's still kind of touting Doge at every turn. I think what would cause Musk to step away would be genuine trouble at his companies. And the truth is, we haven't seen that, right? Investors in Tesla. Now, Tesla stock hasn't been doing great over the last 6 weeks or so, but its stock is still way up after the election. Most Tesla investors think Musk's position with respect to Donald Trump, his being a senior advisor to one of the most powerful people in the world is a net positive for the company. And the stock reflects that. And all of Musk's companies right now are essentially up. SpaceX is trying to raise a mega valuation. And why wouldn't they, right? They're in a great position to win more contracts. Yeah. Bloomberg has been reporting on Twitter X. They're trying to raise money at a higher valuation. So basically, he's up across the board. So I think the thing that could change it, I think the biggest priority for Elon Musk really are these businesses. That's part of why he's doing this. And if the businesses clearly are hurting, if the valuations are falling, then we'll see movement.
Really glad you could join us, Max. It's good to see you. Max Chafkin. Check out the Elon Inc. podcast. Follow his work at Bloomberg Businessweek. Great conversation here on Balance of Power. Did you hear about the desk, by the way? Did you hear this story coming into the hour here? Donald Trump on Truth Social. Remember Elon Musk? You were just seeing it on YouTube. He brought his kid into the Oval Office, picking his nose at the... Remember this whole thing? Donald Trump does not like that. Germaphobe. He had the desk, the Resolute desk, removed. This is real on Truth Social. Quote, the president, after election, gets a choice of 1 in 7 desks, he writes. This desk, the C&O, which was also very well known, used by President George H.W. Bush and others, has been temporarily installed in the White House, while the Resolute desk is being lightly refinished. Very important job. This is a beautiful but temporary replacement. We'll let you know when the Resolute desk goes back in there. I'm guessing there won't be too many children around it. We'll assemble our panel next. Rick and Jeanne are with us coming up right here on Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Great to have you with us here on the Friday edition of Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio, Sirius XM Channel 121, and on YouTube. You can find us on YouTube right now. Search Bloomberg Business News Live. He's still talking. President Trump has been talking now for almost an hour and a half without interruption as he addresses Republican governors who are in town for the RGA, the Governors Association. They do their winter meetings here. The headlines are still flying. He's talking about border policy at this point, as well as tariffs, auto tariffs, he says 25% will go into effect on imported cars on April 2nd. Probably. Need to double the energy that we have right now when he talks about AI, allowing companies to have their own power plants. This has been an interesting conversation. Talking about chip makers coming in. Apple shifting plants because of tariffs. Building plants in the U.S., not Mexico. He says he met with Tim Cook yesterday, and that was the result. We will bring you in the room for this once we get the tape playback from the White House. This is not something that was even supposed to be open to press. They decided to let reporters in. Once we get our hands on that tape, we'll have it for you here. Pretty remarkable, as Donald Trump also pledges to drop illegal drug use by 50%, which is something he says could be done through an anti-drug ad campaign, paging Nancy Reagan. There's a lot more to talk about today, though, because something actually took place last evening. Well, I'll correct myself and say very early this morning on Capitol Hill. Did you see this? The Senate actually passed a budget resolution. Not a big shocker following a vote-a-rama that went on for so many hours. 4:45 a.m., they actually got a vote, 52-48, to pass a $340 billion budget framework. Now, this is not the whole deal. This is really just the initial stage to create what I believe Patrick McHenry yesterday described as the chassis for the reconciliation process that will then follow. Now, Democrats had their way through a lot of amendments, didn't change anything in the end. Rand Paul is the one no vote on the Republican side. Chuck Schumer took to the floor, said we were forced to go on record. The Republicans forced to go on record and defend their plans to cut taxes for Donald Trump's billionaire friends. It's done. The House will have its turn next week, and we assemble our signature political panel for their take on things. Rick and Jeanne are both with us on the Friday edition. Jeanne Zaino, Senior Democracy Fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, our Democratic analyst, and Rick Davis, Republican strategist, partner at Stone Court Capital. Was it worth it, Jeanne? Democrats kept them up all night. What do they have to show for it?
Well, Joe, first of all, you didn't let me in on what they had to eat and drink throughout the night. So I've been waiting with bated breath to see, did they have any fun during this Votorama? But it doesn't sound like.
I saw a lot of boxes of, what is it? We the Pizza? That's the place, right? The pizza. I may have seen some bottles of wine, but I won't go on the record.
Don't say anything. The reality is that this came out the way we all expected it to, a party line vote. Democrats did what they needed to do, which is ask Republicans to take some hard votes, and they took them. But the question now, there's several. Number one is, does Plan B become Plan A, or can the House really move forward with this one bill? And of course, the big thing that's hanging over all of this is Donald Trump's promise just the other day, again, not to touch Medicaid, and the reality of the numbers, which make it very difficult to imagine how you can get to the trillions of dollars you need without touching Medicaid. And so that's what we're going to be waiting for. And all of the pressure and the onus is now on Mike Johnson, as it usually is.
A couple Republicans actually joined. I kid Jeanne, but a couple Republicans joined Democrats. Rick, you may not be surprised to see Susan Collins, one of them, but Josh Hawley was the other, backing a Democratic amendment that would prohibit tax cuts for wealthy Americans if Medicaid funding is cut. Does that give us a sense of what might happen next in the House version?
Yeah, I think that Josh Hawley in this case is the canary in the mine shaft. I think, he makes a point that is not lost on every Republican in the Senate. And part of the reason that they're doing this two-step reconciliation is because they agree with Donald Trump. They don't want to touch that Medicaid payment. And what's buried inside of the, House strategy is, almost $1 trillion in Medicaid cuts. Now, nobody on the Senate side knows how to reconcile that. And I think, frankly, I was a little bit surprised that you didn't have more Republicans joining Hawley in that vote because they will all tell you that this is not where they're taking their legislation. They'll look at the tax bill and find pay-fors along the way, but it's not going to be the gutting of Medicaid like the House Republicans have done. Yeah. So it just reinforces the Senate strategy, frankly, as being more sound.
How about that, Jeanne? Speaker Johnson, you already said, has his work cut out for him. I mean, this could be impossible. What he says, he and Steve Scalise, Tom Emmer, they have plans to get their resolution on the floor next week. Could that pass?
It could pass, but it's going to be very, very difficult. I mean, if you are a Republican in a moderate district, and several friends of this show, for instance, Nicole Malliotakis has already said she's leaning no on this budget resolution, because you are essentially walking yourself out of a job. One of the reasons we keep talking about that Republicans have gone along with Donald Trump and the Trump administration on so much is that they fear a primary. But the reality for these moderates is also they fear what is going to be the commercials that show that they were responsible for cutting Medicaid and services to their constituents so that the wealthy could get an extended and expanded tax cut. And that is not a winning message. And so Democrats are on one corner salivating about this, hoping they continue forward marching. And you've got people like Malliotakis, and she's not alone, and others who are from districts where they simply can't afford to make those kinds of decisions. And so I think it's very unlikely that the House is able to wean this together. And let's not forget all the other promises that Donald Trump has made about things he wants to see in this bill. So could it happen? I suppose it could, but it is going to be very damaging for Republicans in the midterm.
We have breaking news here crossing the terminal, and it brings us back to a story I believe the three of us were talking about right at this time yesterday, remembering that Judge Dale Ho was set to make a ruling on this effort by the Department of Justice to throw out the corruption charges against New York City Mayor Eric Adams, which then set off this whole series of events involving the governor. The judge chose not to make a ruling yesterday and has just ordered a probe of Donald Trump's Department of Justice motion to dismiss the case. This is just breaking right now, and we're going to be learning more about it through the day here, Rick. But now that the ruling has been made, did Governor Hochul make the right move yesterday by setting up these so-called guardrails and not moving to throw him out of office?
Yeah, I think I was pretty outspoken yesterday when you asked me that question. And I thought
you
Governor
sure
Hochul screwed this up. I think she, sticking her nose in New York City politics, should have decided to do one of two things. Yank the mayor and create a vacuum that can be filled through the election this year, or keep her nose out and criticize but stay put in Albany. The mess she's created now is sort of a halfway measure that upsets everybody, frankly, and may be completely scuttled by this judge's potential to undermine the Department of Justice's case, being thrown out. So this is a faster moving piece of information news than I think the governor probably predicted it would be, but her actions indicate that she's just not ready for prime time.
Well, you were very clear about that yesterday, and we see the headline in the New York Times, Jeanne. Facing Trump's threats, New York's governor adopts a Rambo attitude. She actually invoked Rambo yesterday. Sylvester Stallone saying that Trump would answer for drawing first blood. Does your opinion on her action here, her decision, change at all based on this judge's motion today?
No, not my opinion. And you're right about the language. When she spoke yesterday, and I listened very carefully, it was some of the toughest language we have heard. She described herself as a vanguard against the attacks by the president. I mean, to hear this and to think about the fact that New York State and New York City are now pitted off against the president of the United States in this way. This is a national, if not international story, what is going on here. I am very surprised that the judge came out, Judge Ho, and said that he is going to take more time. And this, I just heard this from you, Joe, so I haven't heard what he actually said. But keep in mind, we will hear attacks from this White House on Judge Ho. He used to work for the ACLU. They will describe him once again, like we have heard, probably unfairly, as far as I know, as somebody who is doing the bidding of Democrats and liberal Democrats in the city. I'm not saying I believe that. I'm saying we will hear that rhetoric. His role here was very limited. I'm not sure how you go forward as a judge and say that get more information, but can you require the DOJ to prosecute when they've said they don't want to? I'm hard pressed to imagine that's the case. But from the Democratic side, what we're hearing is many New Yorkers are saying, Kathy Hochul, these courts are the first to stand up as a bulwark against what they see as a chainsaw, as you were just talking about, that Elon Musk is taking to the federal government from Donald Trump and his team. I don't think the lawfare notion works so well for them politically, but they feel like they want somebody to respond. So this is what they are getting. And I am very surprised that the judge said he's going to take more time on this.
Yeah, we're going to have a probe into this effort, apparently. The guardrails, Rick, that Kathy Hochul announced following our talk yesterday when we heard that some sort of sanction might be coming, include a special IG for New York City affairs and inspector general. Also gives the controller, who we had on the late edition of Balance of Power last evening, an independent authority to commence litigation against the federal government when necessary. New York's going to start suing here. What's this going to look like?
Yeah, a bit of a mess. You wonder why Kathy Hochul didn't spend more time attacking the Biden administration when COVID restrictions incapacitated her city and a lot of people moved down to Florida, or when the incredible amount of financial distress caused by inflation created hardship for her constituents in New York. And I just got to believe that so much of this is just political rhetoric that's not going to amount to much. I mean, let's go sue the federal government, knock yourselves out, as if there aren't enough lawsuits against the federal government right now today, probably more than they've ever seen in 50 years in the first month of this administration. Hadn't slowed them down a bit. So look, I mean, this idea of guardrails. So we're going to have an IG with no real power to start taking a look at Eric Adams. Everybody knows what Eric Adams has been up to. I mean, this has been the most well-publicized corruption incident in New York City history. And news traveled fast on this. And he's in the position where that's all he's going to do between now and November is answer for those charges even though he's not going to be prosecuted by the federal government. And so I just
we're going to spend the next 4 years in court, basically. Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.